Hello and welcome back. Today we will be continuing our Victoria 3 tutorial series, and as you might have guessed, we are going to be talking about character traits. Now we are specifically going to be talking about character traits as they relate to having them on your ruler, and so we are going to be ignoring character traits that are specifically very good on generals or admirals or stuff like this, or on agitators, and we are going to be focused on which are the best and worst character traits on your rulers. We're first going to talk about the top 5 worst character traits, or bottom 5 as it were, then we're going to talk about the top 5 best character traits, and then we are going to talk about the top 2 best unique characters in Victoria 3 to have as your ruler. Starting off with an honorable mention, we just want to discuss very briefly, there's a whole ton of traits that give minus character health. This is going to be our honorable mention. We're going to, honorable mention Cancer here. Which is awkward, but if you have a character that you don't like, this is actually going to be a good modifier, but if you like a character, getting one of these is pretty nasty because it's going to cause them to die faster. A few of these are actually good, like Opium Addict and Alcoholic on the whole are probably slightly positive, but Cancer is going to be bad to have if you want your character to live. If you want him to die, though, thumbs up to Cancer, and so that is going to be one. Some of these character traits are actually actively bad, and we'll come back to another one kind of in this list, but then we're going to come into 5th place where we are going to have the bigoted trait. Now the bigoted trait gives you minus popularity, which, just to be clear, minus popularity, you do get flat authority from popularity, so even though it says plus 100 authority here, it's actually only plus 65 once you figure in the flat authority malice that you are getting from your popularity that you would have otherwise. The minus 100 influence is particularly bad in the current metagame where you are trying to get bankrolls. Bankrolls are really strong. This guy maybe doesn't make the list if once the bankrolls get significantly nerfed, but this represents you being able to have one fewer trade agreement or something to this effect, which is kind of painful. And then radicals from discrimination, not a fun modifier. It's a little bit negative, but it's not the worst, and so overall bigoted is just kind of bad in a lot of ways without really any positive trade-off, and so it's not going to be very good. Now in 4th place, in terms of the worst modifiers, we have expensive tastes, which isn't, even though it's like with all these bad character health modifiers, it doesn't actually give you minus character health. You will get a little bit of extra authority, but this tax waste modifier is particularly bad because it deletes money. Tax waste is a really bad modifier because the way it works is it will make it so that money is just not reaching the treasury. It still gets taxed from the pops, but it just disappears into the shadow realm, unless I'm mistaken as to which one of these there is. There's 2 kind of tax modifiers, one that deletes money, one that doesn't, but I believe this is the one that deletes money. It's going to be particularly bad. You're not going to like it. Over the course of the game, this can be actually pretty bad, but a lot of the other ones we're going to discuss are related to specifically infamy generation, but this is going to be the worst character trait that's not related to infamy generation, which brings us to the 3rd character trait, which is imposing. Now imposing is going to give you minus infamy decay. Infamy decay is not as useful, or plus infamy decay as a positive modifier is not as useful as minus infamy cost, because you can stack minus infamy cost multiplicatively with a whole bunch of other modifiers and additively with some modifiers, and so overall minus infamy cost is going to be better, as well as minus infamy cost is going to be multiplicatively useful. Kind of just jumping back into game real quick, or jumping into the game real quick, it's going to be multiplicatively useful with infamy decay, which you can always generate by floating extra influence, because when you decrease the cost and then increase the decay, these are multiplicatively effective with each other. Also just coming in, another reason why minus cost is going to be particularly good is because anytime you go after someone and look to take some of their stuff, this will generate a diplomatic incident, which is going to cause negative relations with a ton of countries equal to half of the amount of infamy you're accumulating. So if you decrease the infamy cost, you are going to hit negative relations less. And so as far as you are decreasing your overall infamy generation over time, minus infamy cost is going to be more useful because it generates less negative relations, even if you end up with the same amount of infamy by getting increased decay instead. It also generates, the full hit with the target country. And so kind of the first infamy one we talk about is going to be imposing. Just the primary thrust is, hey, you're getting minus 25% infamy decay, really not very good, and so that's going to be not a trait you want to have on your ruler. And if you get imposing, you can kind of tolerate, I think you can kind of tolerate expensive taste, especially because a lot of how you play can often give you expensive taste, but I think this is kind of the first one where if you have the imposing character trait. If you have this trait here, I think you actively want to try and get off your ruler as fast as possible, because infamy is a resource. If you're not using it, you're losing it, and this is going to give you less of that resource, and so you can expand a whole lot less if you have a character with the imposing trait. Which brings us to kind of the next one, which is reckless. Reckless gives you plus infamy generation. So how we were saying the minus infamy cost was going to be more useful, reckless gives you plus infamy generation, which is a whole lot less useful, and so this is going to be pretty negative. Fortunately, it does give minus character health, so they're much more likely to die faster, and so they can get rid of themselves, but this plus infamy generation is going to be a pretty negative modifier in most situations, causing you to generally dislike the reckless trait quite a bit and want to get off of it. And finally, we have the very, very worst, unambiguously worst character trait, which is the bandit character trait, which gives you, it gives you plus 100 authority, but alongside that, it's going to give minus 50 popularity, which means you're only getting plus 50 authority. It's going to give you minus 50% infamy decay, and this opposition group approval, even though this is tied to as an IG leader, often your ruler will be the IG leader, and so this can mean you end up having a lot more revs, and so this can also be pretty nasty. The minus prestige isn't too big a deal, but you're basically getting minus 50% infamy decay for kind of no trade-off. This is the worst character trait to have on any of your characters, and if you have it, you should try and get off of that ruler ASAP, whether it's by abdicating, changing your election laws, slotting them out in government. You don't ever want to have a bandit. Like, if you're parliamentary republic, you just always, you'd rather just have way less legitimacy than have someone who's a bandit. Really, really bad character trait, the absolute worst. For the best character traits, we are going to start with an honorable mention for innovative. Now, innovative, I think, is really close. Maybe it's the 5th place. Maybe it's the honorable mention here. But what it is going to give you, it is going to give you plus 10% technology spread. Now, this is going to be particularly useful in the early game when a majority of your kind of research that you are generating is actually going to be from technology spread, or if your economy is like relatively small, is perhaps more so the case than when you're on early game. So if we kind of just take a look in here, and we look at how much innovation we're getting, we actually have 30 levels of university, so we're generating 134 here, and then if we kind of take a look over here, we will be generating 75. Of this, 8 is from unspent innovation. If we just ignore that, we will be getting 67 kind of from tech spread just at a base level. If you don't have any universities, you'll be getting 50 based in active research, and we could be getting around 67 here as Bosnia with a literacy of 56%, and so if we had the innovative trait, this would represent like an increase of 6 in terms of the amount of research we are getting, 6 or 7. For us, if we were playing Bosnia here, it would be an increase of 7 to 8, something like this, which if you are very small can represent a pretty nice change, but this scales downwards as you get bigger and bigger and bigger and just can afford universities as a proportion of your kind of overall economy. You can think of it as effectively decreasing your government costs from universities, both in terms of wages and of the other stuff, by 10%, and so you can see this as a sort of income modifier, but it's not a free money modifier. Actually, would you consider, I'm not sure if you would consider it a free money modifier. In either case, it's pretty solid. It'll be good in many phases of the game, but not as much late game. Generally kind of more the early and middle game, and so we will have innovative as our honorable mention. In 5th place, we did mention, this is kind of, I'm not really sure which is going to be better between innovative and engineer, but engineer, we kind of put in 5th place because it is the absolute best when you are using only the base 10 construction. Innovative is probably the absolute best trait in the game, just like super, 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 super strong, because you will be going from 10 construction to 15 construction, and that represents a huge boost. But other than when you have no construction, no active construction going on, it's kind of a little bit more medium-ish, and there will be more times where innovative is better than engineer. It's just when engineer is best, it is like the absolute best, but also is quite nice. The plus political strength strength of engineers and machinists, because this can help you to demarginalize these guys faster, or the trade unionists faster, which can lead to nice bonuses. And so this is kind of a non-consideration. And so engineer is going to be really good if you are on the 10 construction, or it's going to be kind of good if you are just about to get the trade unions demarginalized, because it'll allow you to get that kind of timing a little bit earlier. And so this is going to be useful. If you have any kind of opinions as which of these is better between engineer and innovative, because I think it's quite close, please feel free to put them in the comments, because I kind of don't have a super strong opinion on which one's better. Next up, we are going to have the ambitious and imperious traits. Now, I'm really not sure which is better between the two of them. They're good for the same reason, which is kind of why we're lumping them together, which is that they are going to give minus decree cost. The radicals from standard living is probably better than this other stuff over here for ambitious, but you also have a differential in popularity where this is going to lose you 35 authority and this is going to net you 25 authority. In particular, the decree cost, the minus to decree cost is really, really good if you already have modifiers that are giving you minus decree cost, such as the power block statue when you are on Sovereign Empire. So if we take a look here, we can take a look and we will see that, hey, we can get minus decree cost from this power block statue if we were to build it. When you stack these modifiers, they are increasingly effective. Now, there is an absolute floor for cost of authority, but if you have this modifier, plus ambitious, instead of decrees costing 100, they will cost 50, allowing you to stack up more decrees. This can be particularly useful when decrees are useful, which is the smaller your country, the better decrees tend to be. I think that in some cases, this is if you are choosing a strategy where you are intentionally stacking decree cost, hunting and pecking for one of these IG traits will definitely make a whole lot of sense, and I think it's something worth doing. Now, the rest of the IG traits are going to be, well, kind of related to infamy. So the next trait is going to be one that is maybe a little bit surprising to people, which is we are going to have the reckless trait. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Generalist, isn't that one of the worst traits? Well, like a tale of two cities, a tale of two IG traits, it's the best of traits, it's the worst of traits. It is going to give you more infamy generation. If you are going high infamy world conquest, and you are just about to turn the corner to gain a bunch of infamy, and you're going to fight a bunch of GPs, and you're going to have a bunch of huge wars, the flat maneuvers per diplomatic play is probably the best thing you can have on your leader, categorically. And so it will, in the context of going high infamy, in the context of when you first kind of turn the corner and go high infamy, and you are going to be fighting a bunch of big powers, and you can take big chunks out of them, and there's a bunch of war goals you could add if you had more maneuvers, that is, if you're not just subjugating and annexing people outright, but you have to fight big people without doing those things, then these extra flat diplomatic maneuvers are actually going to make this basically the best character trait in the game for that specific context. But I think that generally for most of the game, it's better to be on low infamy, at which point the extra infamy generation will be extremely bad. And so I think this is a bad trait and a good trait. The truth hurts. And so next up is going to be just positive ones that relate to infamy generation, and we are going to have the literary trait. It is pretty nice getting the IG pop attraction and the popularity a little bit on the top, but we're mainly here for the plus 25% infamy decay, which is going to be not quite as good as minus infamy cost, but this is going to be an extremely strong modifier that is going to allow you to declare more diplomatic plays over the course of a game, expand a whole lot more without having people get mad at you, and it's just going to be really, really good. You're noticing a trend here. All the good and bad traits are basically related to infamy, which will give kind of no sort of surprise that the best character trait is going to be the cautious trait, which notably gives you minus 20% infamy generation. Now, it is also giving you minus 100 influence. We don't like that. That is kind of sad, but the minus 20% infamy generation is just too good. It's particularly a lot stronger than minus or plus infamy decay, and they work synergistically with each other. But on top of that, it is really nice to get plus 30% character health on the very best trait you can have, because when you get a cautious ruler, when you go out of your way to put a cautious ruler in power, they tend to live for a longer time, which is going to be really good for you for reducing your infamy generation over time. Now, this cautious trait is also going to stack both additively and multiplicatively with other modifiers that relate to infamy reduction. So if we kind of come into game here, it will stack with other things that just categorically reduce all infamy costs, which there is is not too many, but it is going to be present in multilateral alliances, which just gives minus 25% infamy generation. So it is going to be quite strong there. It is also going to stack multiplicatively with other modifiers such as, let's find it, colonialism's minus 10% infamy generation against unrecognized powers. This is also present in civilizing mission, minus 25%, and it is also present in the power block colonial offices, which is going to give minus 5% per level for a total of minus 25%. If you stack all of these modifiers together with a cautious ruler, you can do some pretty bananas stuff, like if Great Qing ever decays down from being an unrecognized major power to just an unrecognized power, which is something that you can encourage and help promote, you can subjugate them for like 15 to 20 infamy. It's absolutely bananas when you stack this modifier with a ton of stuff, and so the cautious ruler in particular is going to be very, very effective, especially after you research multilateral alliances, because it's very important to emphasize that it stacks additively with this minus infamy generation here, which is going to allow you to if you have minus 25% infamy generation and you take something that costs 10, otherwise it's going to cost 7.5. But if you have minus 50%, that is going to reduce you from the minus of the loud car outside makes it easier to record videos, but when we have the initial minus 25%, we've reduced the amount that we would gain by a quarter, right? We've gone from 10 to 7.5. But when we're already on that 7.5 and that minus 25% infamy generation, and we get another minus 25% infamy generation, we'll be reducing the infamy we get by a third instead, right? Because we're cutting 0.25, or we're cutting 2.5 out of 7.5, which is a third of the remaining infamy cost. If we were to stack another minus infamy generation on top of that, it would reduce it by 75 or by 50%, or the remaining infamy cost by 50%. So the more of these you can stack, the better. And cautious is just an absolutely insane modifier, and it will pair even well if you can get both cautious and literary simultaneously, or float extra diplo for the extra decay on top of the reduced cost. This brings us to the two best historic characters in all of Victoria 3, both of which have simultaneously the cautious and literary trait. Starting off with the lesser of the two, we have Grigory Plekhinov, which is going to be an agitator that appears specifically in Russia. He's a trade unionist, a social democrat, a politician rather. Politician kind of streamlines him a little bit more into the trade unionist, but he's going to have the cautious and literary traits, which, as we've discussed, are the two top traits, and also the firebrand trait. The firebrand trait is going to be kind of useful, firebrand. Mainly because it's going to give you plus 50 popularity, but it is also going to give you some IG pop political strength and pop attraction, which is going to be particularly useful with him on the trade unionist, because this can help you to demarginalize the trade unionists. However, getting the trade unionists as your overall leadership is going to be a little bit more difficult, and you definitely want him to be the overall leader, and so you're going to have to make some moves specifically to make him the overall leader. You'd shuffle some things around, but you definitely want to try and get him as your overall leader if you can, possibly even swapping to monarchy after you do so. That way he stays the leader. This is going to be kind of a play pattern that comes up a bit. If you ever get someone who's cautious and literary, you kind of want to lock him in, and so he is going to be a particularly good one. But better than Grigory Plekhinov is going to be Great Britain's Charles Dickens, which is an agitator that spawns in Great Britain specifically. He is Intelligentsia, which is generally a little bit easier to get to leadership, especially if you're going Council Republic or Parliamentary Republic. It's much easier to get more clout on the Intelligentsia, or it can be. You definitely want to try and manipulate it up if you can, recruiting of generals, building more universities in the capital, and this type of stuff. He is a reformer, which is probably not as good as Social Democrat overall. Maybe it's not as good. I'm not actually entirely sure. But he is going to have cautious literary as mentioned. But on top of that, he has what in my mind is much, much better than Plekhinov's firebrand trait. He has the persistent trait. Now, the persistent trait on its own isn't necessarily the best, but if we kind of come back over here and we look up persistent, we will see that persistent has something we really like on a character we already like, which is plus 20% character health. This by itself, notably, is not useful. In fact, it's terrible if we have it on a leader that we don't like. We don't really care about the political strength of bureaucrats, although this will give a little bit more power to the Intelligentsia, so it helps to get them in power, or keep them in power once we get them there. The minus IG approval is kind of like blah, we prefer not to have it, but this plus 20% character health, when paired with this plus 30% character health, means that when you get Charles Dickens as your leader, if you switch back to monarchy, he will stay alive, generally speaking, for a real long time, and you will be able to just rampage over the map. We did this in our UK run, where we conquered basically everything on the entire map that was unrecognized without going over 25 infamy, because we stacked all the modifiers possible, conquered all of Qing, conquered all of, over here, just everything that was unrecognized got conquered without us needing to go over 25 infamy, which is an absolute insane thing, almost as insane as the price tag on that loud car, but that is kind of the real power of John Stuart Mill. And by John Stuart Mill, I of course mean Charles Dickens, because I can't remember my English dudes. So he is going to be the best agitator in the game, but if you happen to hit the super lucky and you get someone who's both literary and cautious by random roll, because these are the only two historic characters that have the two traits, then you want to try and get them in power as best you can. This also makes, kind of for low infamy play, certainly less infamous than that other loud car, low infamy play particularly strong for both Russia and for Great Britain. It's going to be a lot easier. But that is our tier list, those are our top 5s and bottom 5s for all the character traits in the game. You'll notice the kind of consistent theme is that they are mostly related to infamy generation. The other stuff in general is just not very strong, although it will situationally be really, really good in some instances. There aren't too many things that are actual economic buffs, like the opium plantations throughput is actually an economic buff. Generally, it's related to authority, authority and influence, and so these are relatively small modifiers, and so we would generally prefer the infamy related ones, because this is a very significant resource that you use to expand and grow your economy through the military. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube algorithm thing, and other than that, have a good one.